Next up on the agenda is the FY20 board budget priorities. Would you like me to proceed with those? We stay here, please, and pull those up. Yeah, please. Do you want me to go to item number 6, sir?
Okay, the two had a question.
No, I was just asking you if you wanted to.
No.
Yeah, let's keep
Not unless they
moving
want to
forward.
move something around. But.
I'm trying to get my computer to catch up with yours.
Right. Okay.
So we're on our next item, which is?
Item number 6, the board budget priorities.
Yes.
This is a perpetual agenda item, and at the request of several board members, we moved this item into the morning, and so that it would follow the monthly budget report to keep the process flowing into the future requests, if you will, for your budget. Deborah, if you'll pull up the formulation tracker. Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to invite Jacob Wright from the governor's office to come forward. We are at the
Please come up, Jacob.
Come up, Jacob.
Brian, you are a gentleman and a scholar there, giving up your seat.
So I have a seat here. And Jacob, will you introduce yourself? This is by way of the process. You know, we follow the Budgetary Procedures Act around the time of October, early October, usually following your October board meeting. We make a proposal to the governor's office, which is required by law under the Budgetary Procedures Act. During the January meeting, the process is that we allow for an opportunity for you as board members to compare. Typically, the governor releases his proposal to the legislature around the latter part of November, early part of December, which occurred here. So Jacob is here. I'm just going to walk you through this real quickly. And so let me orient you to the tracker. On the left-hand side is what you as the board have proposed for funding. It's broken out by category, which was established by the board as a procedural aspect of this process, which is the Budgetary Procedures Act. But within each category, then on the right-hand side, we take each item that you ask for. For instance, and I'll just start with enrollment growth. We're pretty much on the same page there. The only difference being, or aspect of it, is how the governor's approach or proposal on how to fund it. We're asking for new money, and if you want to further develop or drill into that, Jacob's here to answer questions on the governor's proposal. The WPU, the board proposed 5.5%, and the governor is proposing a 4% WPU increase, or increase to the value of the WPU. We all, by way of what's called the Common Data Committee process, agreed that a 1% is approximately $32 million. So when you take $32 million and times about 5.5, that's where we come up with the $176 million, and then you can take it and times it by 4% on that. So any questions or concerns before I move out of Category A? Jacob, do you want to elaborate anything on Category A by way of comparison to the governor's office?
Yes, Jacob Wright from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Thanks for entertaining me. The one thing I would point out, and I mean welcoming me, although this is entertaining. One thing on the growth, Scott talked about enrollment growth, and the governor does recommend fully funding enrollment growth as traditionally calculated in the Common Data Committee. The one difference here is that the calculation for the voted and board levy guarantee programs shows a balance in 2020 of $20.9 million, and it's been the traditional practice to use that balance to offset the cost of growth. And so that's the difference, is that your recommendation or your proposal does not include that.
So, go ahead.
I do have a question. Board Member Bolter, are you ready to ask that, or did you want to wait till it got further in? Okay, I didn't want to put you off or not recognize you. So, Board Member Bolter.
So my question is, for clarity, because I've heard different things from legislators, so I just want to be clear. If we were to get a 4% increase in the WPU, then, new monies, WPU, then our property tax would go up for every 1% of the WPU, it's $4.7 million property tax increase. So then that would be an $18.8 million increase in property taxes for the homeowners in the state of Utah. And there's currently 700,000 homeowners in the state of Utah. My husband's a real estate agent, so I had him research that. But so their property tax, and then if the if the 5.5% increase happens, then that would be a $25.9 million property tax increase. And on the $18.8 million increase, it would average out to be about $27 more per property tax owner on their home, on their property tax. That's about approximate. Obviously, it's a little bit different with if you own $1 million home versus a $300,000 home. But I'm just like, I just want clarity that if it's a 4% increase, it is 4.7 million times 4, which equals 18.8. I just want the property tax owners to understand what was passed in the legislature last session, HB 293.
You want us to address
I'm
the
tracking your
implications.
numbers, but let's just make sure we're accurate on a couple things.
I just want to make sure I'm accurate.
Board Member Bolter, you threw some numbers out on the 700,000 and
Well,
that's affected by the tax.
There's
And
700,000 property owners in the state of Utah.
Individual property
Individual
owners,
property owners.
not
Homeowners.
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 Okay, well, this
Property owners.
this tax is just not on homeowners. It's on the whole taxing entity, which some of us
My understanding
Some of
was
us-
it was,
pay a lot of business tax too, and so it's every.
It's every property
it's-
tax
It's
and-
every property.
and
every
there's
property,
700
Real property tax, so.
Right.
I just wanted to add that in, so there's, other that 700 homes.
property owners.
There's also all the business, and then you look at,
So, jump
I
in
asked
now.
him to look up how many homeowners and property owners, and he said that he can't give an exact amount, but there's about 700,000
but
as
they're
of
not all
last night.
they're not all created.
Right, and of course it was different, but I just want to get clarity, because I think the people need to understand
Sure.
that if we get a 4% WPU, then that is an 18.8%, that $18.8 million increase on your property taxes, not individual, but throughout the state of Utah.
Chair, I recommend you let Assistant Superintendent address.
Okay.
Yeah,
However
to
you
provide
want.
I just want to
clarity.
make
Yeah,
sure that
absolutely,
I
yeah,
am
let-
understanding this correctly.
Let
Okay.
her talk to that.
So I'm not prepared to discuss the numbers, but I can discuss the tax that it increases, and I think that will help with understanding. HB 293 had an element included in it that implemented the WPU value growth, I believe that's the right name. For every percentage increase in the WPU, then the basic levy goes up in the same proportion. And so you're correct, I believe the number is somewhere around $18 million for 4%. The basic levy is charged against residential homeowners, commercial property, personal property, various types of property that are taxed against the basic levy. So it would impact more than just residential homes.
If, Chair, to Board Member Bolter's point, 'cause if you want us to, we can come back with, we're all at a consensus number. The impact, though, to the 700,000+ property owners would take a little bit more time to tell you exactly what that is. Is that fair, Jacob? So we can come back to you with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because when I was talking to different legislators, some were under the impression that the tax increase wouldn't happen unless it was above a 4% increase. Some were under, so there was different
Yeah.
and interpretations of,
By 1%.
they all had different interpretations of that bill and the outcome of it. And I mean, I'm all for raising the WPU. That's where I'd rather put the money. But now if we're going to put a burden on the backs of our taxpayers, then
Right.
I'm a little hesitant.
And Chair, to her point, that's exactly why this process is so great, is so that we can all ensure that we're all communicating to the same levels or standards that you're hearing out there. So I appreciate that point, and I think Natalie has another comment.
I was just going to clarify that in the caveat, there's an order of operation. So as we, as a CDC group, set the basic levy, I think the only reason the if clause that we wouldn't be increasing the basic levy is if the property tax that's necessary to fund the basic program is below the floor that was set by that bill. So we have to always set the floor at double 16. If for some reason the basic program and the amount that needs to be funded out of the basic levy is more than double 16, then we wouldn't do all of the rest of the things that the bill required. But my understanding and the calculation that we did this year is we are still assessing the floor. And so based on everything we know right now with the estimates that we have, and if the bill doesn't change, then we would still do those in the order of operations listed by the bill.
Chair, if it's okay with you, I'll proceed a little bit more quickly through the
Okay.
categories
All right.
because there are some actions that we're requesting that we really need to get to. I don't want to rush through this, so this is available, for further review and questions of staff, in the days ahead. Safe and healthy schools, you see our amounts recommended and then the governor's recommendation. Again, I think we're mutually supportive. We're close on almost all the aspects, and we're all together on safe and healthy schools. Again, it just kind of amounts to how to fund it and where, the funding should or might go. To from, we recommended $5 million. There's no recommendation in the governor's budget. Necessarily existing small schools, $500,000, $3 million. And then it explains on the right-hand column what that means as far as the governor's perspective on how or what the $3 million would be used for or the type of distribution that would occur. School nurses, we've made that request. It doesn't, just because you see zeros in there, it doesn't necessarily mean the governor didn't recommend school nurses. Last night, Jacob advised the Finance Committee. We spent a lot more time on this, but the governor's position is to allow flexibility and that a local entity could use funding to hire school nurses. The University of Utah Reading Clinic, we both on that down. That's a higher education piece here. So while you supported that, my understanding is that $500,000 wouldn't necessarily come to us. It's just our cross collaboration with higher ed, and you see that as well in the advising a little bit further down. But before I get to that, there's the certified teacher librarians. Then there's the statewide advising corps. Where again, that funding would flow to the university, but that's something that was brought to you last month to see as far as the board's support towards that funding stream or purpose. The Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program. So these two that I just advised you on, the advising corps and Beverly Taylor Sorensen, were two additional ones that were asked for after the board had made their proposal to the governor's office, and so we're tracking those going into the session. There's the Learn platform and competency-based education. And category C, so then the governor's recommendation doesn't have those. For category C, we're all pretty much on the same drive path with USDB steps and lanes. The USIMAC sustainability request. On the opt-out part, the board did request the $1.7 million, and that's not in the governor's proposal. Category D for the office budget, USIMS, the $17.2 million. The governor's office or the governor recommended a $5 million one-time towards that purpose. The philosophy there, or from GOMB, from Kristen Cox, is to look at this and approach it from a modularization process. So, if we were to pass that way, or we would receive that funding, we'd spend that $5 million, on the high priority modularizations or towards, ensuring that the system is better equipped to detect and deter hacks or processes like that. Then evaluate it and come back for additional funding along those lines. The School of Land Trust section budget, we asked for $60,000. That's not, the $60,000 is not in the governor's proposed budget. Jacob, do you have any just last minute additional items or clarity that went in a short time frame related to his proposals?
Yeah, I guess I'll just be as brief as I can and hit the gist of the governor's approach, which is his approach each year. and that is to provide local flexibility in the funding. And so with the governor's recommendation, with a 4% increase in the value of the WPU, with funding for counselors and funding in the flexible allocation, the governor really is looking to provide schools with the opportunity to prioritize their funding as they choose, whether it's for safe and healthy school needs, whether it's, well, I guess nurses fall in there, so that was one that was pointed out, whether it's librarians, whether it's salary increases for staff, whatever it may be, the governor defers those decisions to the local decision makers.
So that concludes the side-by-side comparison with the governor's office that is part of the procedures that we, in accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Act. This side-by-side comparison occurs every year during your January meeting. I've also in the board backups attached what staff here have been developing, which is just an awesome, and I recommend you carry it with you. If you pull up the education, it's titled Education Elevated Final. If you pull that up, you see in the middle, so scroll down a little bit, Deborah, please. You see basically what amounts to a summary of your proposals. Now, obviously, this doesn't do the side-by-side comparison with the governor's office. You have that on the other sheet. But this is an awesome, awesome tool for you to have, or a resource for you to have as you go into meetings. And, you know, as Board Member Bolter articulated, you know, sometimes there's some differences or misunderstandings potentially, but this would allow you to have a snapshot, if you will, of what you proposed to the governor and what we're carrying forward into the legislative session. The next one is just the funding table. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, trying to move through this.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry, back on the previous one we were on. It says Category D, USBE office budget. There's $60,000 for this school land trust section budget. Is that just the management of that provides for personnel management, or what's that $60,000 for?
It is for a payroll purpose. So under last session, there was HB 404, which basically took the director position and moved it over into what's established as an advocacy committee under 404. The amount that they transferred is $212,000, and so that amount was inclusive of what we were funded for payroll for a director position. So what we're asking for to make the difference between Paula Plant now currently serves in an interim type status. In order to sustain a director level salary, we need another $60,000 out of the trust, so that we can, for not just for anyone in that position.
Sure,
so
I
that
just
we
had
can,
wondered if it was management or what we're using the SITLA funds for.
Yeah,
So-
does that answer your
Yeah, that
question?
answers it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. Then the next
Bill, one other quick question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Board Member Cannon?
Yes, I just, looking on the comparison budget, I noticed that we had $500,000 for necessarily existent small schools, and that the governor is proposing an ongoing $3 million add-on for students in rural Utah. So could you address the difference in the amounts and what that will be used for and how it relates to the WPU?
Jacob?
Thank you. Absolutely. So in this instance, these are related items. They're not identical items. So the governor has not proposed increased funding for the NEST program. Rather, he's taking a look here at the broader issue of rural schools, of which the NEST schools are a subset. And so he's proposing new funding, an add-on, for students in rural schools. Now, I should point out he has not put forward a definition of rural schools for this purpose, or a definition of rural school students, and he has not put forward a distribution model for this funding, but rather intends to work with stakeholders through the session to come to consensus on what would be appropriate.
A follow-up.
So I noticed above that there is the two from transportation that was not funded, and as I recall, this was something that they were trying to get every year for like 3 years to fully fund transportation. That's been such an issue, especially in rural areas. Could you address the reason there's nothing there?
If I may address it, so yes, there was a request to fund it over a period of time at $5 million per year. Last year, we received $4 million. So we did get the $4 million of the $5 million we asked for last year. So this is another $5 million along the lines of what was asked for, requested from the LEAs beginning last year. So the $5 million is spread out over a certain time period.
So
so
the
that's
question
what-
is, why is it not in the governor's?
Oh, yeah, he can address that.
Well, in this case, as the governor weighs the many requests that are made, he opted to fund other items.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I know you're not done with your presentation yet, but I was just curious if you'd go back and maybe explain a little bit, because the governor's proposal in meeting the kind of that school safety request uses the flexible allocation. Do you mind explaining a little bit more clearly what the flexible allocation appropriation is, kind of what its history a little bit, and how does it differ from LEA's use from WPU funds, et cetera?
Okay, Chair, I recommend that Natalie explain answer the question on the history of the flexible allocation, and then just quickly go over to Jacob for, why the governor proposed to put it, or through that process, if that's okay. So Natalie, will you explain or answer Vice Chair Cummins' question on the history of the flexible allocation?
Is there a specific amount of time you want to go back, or just last year?
Yeah.
This could be a long history. So, just for last year, there's about a little over $7 million that is remaining in the flexible allocation program. This current fiscal year, the funds that were generated and put into the teacher student success account were also put into flexible allocation, and those funds were distributed one time to our LEAs. That funding is the subject of discussion during the session as well. The $65 million that was directed towards that TSSA account. I'm not sure if that's the nature of your question, or if you're wanting to know what appropriate use is. It's effectively unrestricted for our LEAs. They can make choices as to where they want to put those dollars. It's distributed based on ADM.
Follow up?
So it's an account, and so how money goes in there. So it's different than like an allocation that comes through the state to an LEA such as the WPU. So the account is set up, and so I'm just curious how that account's set up. How does money get in? How does money get out? And how can it be used? So you said it's a flexible, so the legislature puts it in, but is it completely flexible when they put it in, or is it earmarked for certain purposes?
So flexible allocation is one of the related to basic programs. It's below the line. So it doesn't have a separate account. It functions similarly to enhancement for at-risk students. It has its own appropriation, and it has its own spot, but it's not a separate account. And so when funds are put in there, there is legislation or directive as to how those are to be distributed. Right now, there's a statute that indicates how we distribute, and it's based on ADM, I believe. If Jamie's back in the back and nodding her head, then I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain it's ADM for all of our LEAs. So the allocation is the same for all of our districts and charter schools. Below the line means that it's 100% state dollars. It's not supported by the basic levy, which was part of our previous conversation. And that also means that every year as we go through the public education appropriations process, discussions are had about the uses of the fund. If distribution wants to be changed, it's a little more subject to review sometimes than the basic program is.
Another follow-up?
Just a follow-up then, when you said that there's $7 million remaining, how does money remain in that flexible allocation if it's appropriated out by a distribution?
So I'll go back one more year, which will explain that comment. So 2 years ago, there was a rather large appropriation. I think it was somewhere, I'm not even going to guess because I know I will be wrong. It was more than $7 million. The legislature determined to make the add-on values for the special education and CTE WPUs the same as the regular WPU, and they funded that by taking money out of the flexible allocation line and moving it above the line into those two restricted programs. The amount that was remaining is that $7 million, a little over $7 million, and it stayed in that account. Had the TSSA discussion not occurred last year, the only thing being distributed right now would be that remainder of that $7 million. And so that stayed as like the base appropriation. The $65 million that was put into flexible allocation this year was only put in as one time. So I think that the base appropriation that we will see coming out of the bill I can't remember offhand if they put the TSSA in there or not. They did, didn't
They
they?
did on a
I think they
one-time
did.
basis.
I think they put that again one time just because they needed the budget to balance in order to get the base budget through for 2020. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. You can put things in and out. We cannot, staff cannot move things. And I don't think the board has the ability to move things under statute. I think the legislature can move things around between programs, but that would have to be a statutory appropriation.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So just to clarify, Natalie, the TSSA and the 65 million, that was a one-time funding to give to the districts when it was told to the people that the TSSA would go directly to schools and that there would be accountability about how that money was spent. But because those they didn't know how to set up that accountability measure, it was just given to the districts at this time, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Chair, do you want Jacob to elaborate on the governor's piece to the, using the flexible allocation? So on that, do you?
If he wants to.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. On the flexible allocation piece in particular, we spoke earlier, you had a discussion earlier about what is known as the WPU value rate. That's the rate that generates the increase in property tax that Board Member Bolter brought up. That results in money, in revenue that displaces education fund from the basic school program. So this is where we get wonky. The basic school program is an entitlement program. If you have X number of WPUs, you receive that number of WPUs times the value of the WPU value. The local districts are required to put in property tax revenue in order to participate in that program. That's the basic levy, the money, the revenue generated by the basic levy. The state then makes up the difference with education fund money. The WPU value rate increases the amount of local property tax invested in the basic school program, which decreases necessarily then the state's matching obligation or the amount the state has to put in to guarantee the entitlement. The state can then take that displaced education fund and expend it elsewhere. In this case, House Bill 293 that was passed dictates that that displaced funding move into the teacher and student success account. That money was expended this past year, or I guess we're in the current year, fiscal 19, on a one-time basis. The governor is recommending that that $65 million become an ongoing appropriation in the flexible allocation program. Now, in addition, with his recommendation of increasing the value of the weighted pupil unit by 4%, the WPU value rate will be increased to generate an additional $18.8 million that will displace education fund from the basic school program. The governor recommends putting that into the flexible allocation program as well, and that is to provide as much flexibility as possible with that funding.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Who's going to be managing that flexible spending account?
The flexible allocation program is an existing program in the Related to Basic program as part of the minimum school program. That funding flows through the Board of Education to the LEAs just like any other program.
Isn't there an external group or entity that is overseeing that as well in that discussion?
I think so.
Natalie, do you have that?
So local boards of education look at all of the funding that they receive and they allocate those funding areas in their local budgets. So our local LEAs right now are making determinations about how they use flexible allocation. And that would be transparent in their budget process.
Okay. One more question, Chair, if I may.
One more follow-up.
You said that the governor was asking for that $65 million to be ongoing. Where's that money coming? Is that coming from the basic levy then, on an ongoing, or where is that money coming from?
In House Bill 293, when they created the $65 million, they made a direct appropriation of $46.5 million of education fund. The other $18 million is also education fund, but it's generated by the property tax increase.
So the 18 million is, but not the 65.
Well, we've got
already
two
there.
$18 million amounts here. So
Okay.
this may cause a little confusion. So,
Okay.
so the 65 million, so if we go back to the general session 2018,
Right.
House Bill 293, the legislature appropriated $46.5 million into the teacher and student success account. Additionally, in creating the new property tax, the WPU value rate, that generated $18 million in change in increased local property tax revenue that local LEAs would contribute to the basic school program, which reduced the state's obligation to the basic school program. It just made available education fund that could be spent elsewhere. So that then was also appropriated to the teacher and student success account. So it's all education fund money, the $65 million, and it will remain education fund money. The bulk of the authority going forward for that funding, the spending capacity is a result of increased property tax revenue.
Okay.
I know that sounds crazy.
Okay.
I'll
Board
have to
Member
come to
Scott
Scott's office. He
Hansen.
can draw it out for me again.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a newbie question maybe for you, Scott. I'm looking at the proposed budget that the board has put forth of the $351 million. How does the governor's proposed budget compare to that? Do we have just a bottom line at the? I don't see a total down at the end of the governor's, and is there a way to do that? I think there's some money maybe that's off this sheet that the governor's proposing.
Right. So what I did was, anticipating that question, Chair, from many of the board members, the next handout you have totals the governor's one. And so you can see it on the, if we pull that up, Deborah's going to pull it up. There, you know which one I'm talking about? This one? Yeah, I think. Yes. So see, there, this is the one that summarizes all of the governor's proposal, and then you see the total at the bottom. So there's our amount, and then there's his amount in total. However, probably one of the key takeaways from this is what we're proposing is all new money. And then here, this proposal has, use of existing funds too. So I think that's probably one of the biggest distinguishing factors, right, Jacob? Or?
Yeah, so real quickly, the comparison that you have does not include every one of the governor's recommendations. So I would encourage you to actually look through this table that Deborah has displayed on the screen. This is the governor's complete recommendation for education. So some of these items, as they're not in your current request, did not get added to the comparison.
Right.
Now it is broken up so that.
I'm sorry, maybe just for clarification, I'm not finding that sheet in the documents that we have.
It's in the
What's
backups.
it
It's in the
titled?
public portion of the agenda item,
Right.
and it's titled Revised Final Education Funding. That's that one.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Right. There you
Thank
go.
you.
Okay.
Okay.
So what we can do moving forward is, to Jacob's point, is we can, so now that we've done a side-by-side comparison of your proposal to see if the governor matched, or now we can go for, before the legislative session, we can take this and say, okay, here's what also the governor is proposing, beyond your proposal too. That's part of this process. But we just give you this to move along that line. It's a lot. It's a lot of information for sure. So,
But when we're at the table asking for funding, it's nice to know or to remind them where the governor's office expectations, and then we have ours, and it's kind of the normal process, with the exception we have the comparables. Natalie?
I just wanted to point out a clarification. So my phone a friend has phoned me and told me that the flexible allocation is not on EDM. It's actually allocated based on basic program WPUs that all of our LEAs have. So I just wanted to make sure that we said that so that everyone received that clarification. And thank you, phone a friend.
Thanks, Ben, or Jamie.
Okay, please continue.
Okay, so Deborah, if you'll go back to the board document. So here's some action steps so between last meeting in December and this meeting, you'll see in the recommended action. No, actually, go back to this right here. Go back to the agenda item. There you go. And if you'll blow that up, can you blow it up a little bit? Oh. Well, not that big. Yeah. So okay. If you go back to the agenda item, item 6.1, FY20 board budget priorities. Since the last meeting, we were approached by IC. They're asking for a 6% increase in the base, which would be about a $296,400 increase. This would be a base increase for everyone except Hogle Zoo, who was new last year. The increased field trip services, outreach, and teacher professional development, I believe that PD is. The number of students served is reflective of the charter school traditional school demographics. They currently serve about 10 to 11% of charter schools, which is the same percent of charter schools we have statewide. And then the fourth point is equitable services are provided for charter schools. So here's a request that's post-proposal to the governor's office, but is ahead of going into the legislative session for you to consider today. Ask questions. We have representatives here. I'm sure the superintendent can talk to it. We would need action, though, to let us know as staff to continue to pursue and track this particular request, subject to your questions.
Okay. Superintendent Dixon?
I just want to clarify one thing. So when Deputy Jones and I met with the group the other day, they indicated that 10 to 11% of the students they serve are in charters, which is equated with the number of our students in charters. So it's equated that way. So it's subtle, but they don't serve 10% of our charters. They just serve about the same, 10% of the students. Yeah.
Okay, do we have questions, comment, motion? Board Member Belknap.
I'd like to make a motion that we move forward with this increase. I don't know exactly what the motion needs to be, Chair. I didn't pay attention. Okay, let's just be real. I really just want to approve this.
Okay.
Or put it on the priorities.
You want to ask Deputy Superintendent Jones what
yes.
that would be and then see if you agree?
Okay.
The motion would be, motion is to add the request for $296,400 as a Utah State Board of Education proposal to the legislature for funding.
And then I'd like to speak to that, and yes, that's my motion.
What was it for again?
$296,400 for IC.
Something science.
Informal science education.
Okay, do we have a second?
You know what IC stands for?
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? A second. Okay, second. Board Member Lair. Discussion to the motion. Want to speak to the motion, Board Member Belknap?
I'd like to speak to it because this is money that goes directly to the students. These different groups that are on this list, I can't even name all of them, but they go outreach. So they even go to our rural schools. They go all over the place. If they can't get in to their site, it's on a road show. And so I think this is really important because it hits all of our students and it's on a rotating basis. And I've watched it happen. It pops up and schools have that opportunity. So I think this is very appropriate.
Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, Ms. Lorraine, will you restate the motion?
Okay, the motion is that the board add the request for $296,400 for IC to its budget request.
Okay, that's a motion before the board. We'll vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Lastly, last month,
Oh, do you
the,
have it?
oh,
Hold
go
on.
ahead. Okay.
Oh,
No,
hold it.
It's the
Okay.
whole group.
It's the whole group, right?
Okay, I
No, you're fine.
didn't see a light. I apologize.
La-
We can get something to throw at me, but I'm, okay. All right, please
Lastly-
continue.
Lastly, in December, again, there was three requests brought to you: the Beverly Taylor Sorensen, the Board of Regents Statewide College Advisor Program. Along the lines of the motion you just took to add IC, there was a third request for administrative funding for charter schools. And the decision back then was to defer it to this month to see whether or not it's something that the board wanted to proceed with. So either way, it's going to go in front. My understanding is that the requesters will take it in front of the legislature at a later date. So it's just one of the, it was deferred last month for further consideration, is my understanding.
And the amount is?
It's in the backups. The amount is, oh wait, it's back here. Hold on.
Clarity on that.
I don't know if they're here.
23 million?
If you like, we can defer it again, and if, you know, I can invite the individuals to come and elaborate further on it. You know, you're going to have meetings, you know, subsequent meetings to this one ahead of the session and during the session. It's,
Okay, well, yeah,
so,
we
but
can
it's
have
in the
that.
backups.
Board Member Belknap?
Yes, I'm looking for clarity exactly what it means, administrative money for charter schools. Could you give clarity?
Go ahead, Nat.
Thanks.
For the administrative funding for charter schools.
I'm not sure what they're meaning. I know from allowable cost perspective, it's funding that's given to charter schools to complete administrative tasks. So reporting, data, accounting, finance-related things. There really is not a lot of restrictions on that purpose.
And my understanding is, if I could just elaborate, maybe Jamie can shake her head, don't think it $100. It's $100 per charter school student, so they're looking to try to raise that amount up per charter school student for administrative
So we could have
costs.
this come back with more?
We could, yes, yeah, we can.
And add
I'm
more
just
detail.
making sure you
I'd
know
rather-
that was part of the request. You don't have to make a decision on it today, we just want to make sure that you do, unless you want to.
What? I'd rather, let's make sure we can answer all the
You know?
questions and we're really clear on what's being proposed, and
Yeah.
I'd rather, if we're behind it and supportive,
So-
that we move it through on ours.
Right,
but-
so Natalie points out that in the backups, it's specific that what they're requesting is that to add another $100. So it'd be $200 per charter school student. That's what the request is.
Okay. Board Member Scott Hansen?
Chair, I'd make a motion to defer this to the next board meeting.
Second.
Well, it can die too, so.
Yeah,
So we can.
either way.
So we have a motion and a second and discussion to the motion. Okay, Board Member Belknap, did you have discussion to the motion? Board Member Linda Hansen?
I would like to ask why we are deferring it, because I'm not hearing that. What, are you hoping to get more information for next board meeting?
Yeah, I'm,
That's a question.
that's what I think we're asking for.
If I could respond to that, I think
Yes.
that it's clear there are questions that were raised that we weren't able to answer here today. There
Right.
doesn't seem to be anybody who can speak to this with clarity. I think we should get more information on it before we vote on it.
Okay,
And we have time to do it, so.
yeah, there's time, it's okay.
Okay. We have a motion to defer the request to the next board meeting. I'm not seeing any other discussion, so let's vote on the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Will the ayes raise their hand and be recognized? Board Member Lear, Board Member Hansen, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Linda Hansen, Did I say Scott Hansen? I'm sorry. Did I goof that up? Let me start all over. Board Member Lear, Board Member Scott Hansen. No, that's a no? Oh. Okay, I'm going to start. I've got to do this right. Okay, Board Member Lear, Board Member Scott Hansen, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Linda Hansen, Board Member Davis, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Janet Cannon, Board Member Jenny Earl, Board Member Michelle Bolter, Board Member Ellis, sorry, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. The motion passes. Yeah, I thought there was more than that. Well, Laura was a no. Yeah, we have that one.
That would have been much easier.
Well, I thought I heard some more over here, so.
Sorry.
Okay, please continue.
Sir, subject to your questions or any questions from the board members, that concludes item number 6 and 6.1.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I just wanted to express appreciation for the governor's office being present today and speaking towards their budget. And I'm guessing that as we move forward, we'll have the opportunity maybe to, as we're coming before the legislature, to maybe collaborate a little bit and modify our priorities possibly, or vice versa, as we speak to the legislature about our common interests. So thank you for your time today.
Yes.
Thank
Jacob.
you for having me. I appreciate it. I want to give a shout out real quick for what it's worth for me about your staff. It's a great privilege to work with Scott and Deborah and Jamie and Natalie and all of your staff with whom I interact. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. This concludes your report. Is that right, Scott?
So, yes, sir, we're done.